So then, time for a look at the day's top business news. And France 24's business journalist, Brian Quinn, is joining us from home once again. Brian, let's start with the stock markets in Asia. I mean, they've seen a bit of a boost, haven't they, following the signing of the world's largest free trade agreement on Sunday. Give us all the details, Brian.
Well, Stuart, Asian indexes definitely got a nice pop Monday, particularly in Japan and Korea. Tokyo's Nikkei closed up over 2%. Kospi in Seoul not far behind. European markets are opening modestly higher as investors here on the continent focus a bit more on the worsening COVID-19 situation, both here and in the U.S. Those market moves, though, moving higher, and that indeed follows the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership on Sunday. The RCEP, as it's called, brings together 15 countries across the Asia-Pacific region. It includes South Korea, China, Japan, and Australia. Member nations make up almost a third of the world's population and around 30% of the global economy. The deal is set to eliminate around 90% of tariffs between its members. Analysts say that could boost the world economy by around $200 billion within a decade. The pact is seen as a big win for Beijing, helping to cement China's economic influence in the region while not requiring too much in the way of environmental or human rights considerations. One notable non-member is India, which dropped out of negotiations in 2019 amid growing tensions with China. Also missing is the U.S., which pulled out of the more ambitious Trans-Pacific Partnership as one of Donald Trump's first actions as president. Now, RCEP, now that it's starting to come into play here, is historic in that it is the first ever trade deal between China, Japan, and South Korea. We have seen that reflected on the stock markets today. Japanese exporters marked some big gains, especially in the auto sector. Korean tech firms like Samsung also got a nice bump. Some of those gains are also probably due to some favorable data coming out and showing the Japanese economy grew by 5% in the third quarter, while Chinese manufacturing data also beat expectations. Asian economies overall are seeing some of the best results currently amid this global pandemic context, particularly among tech manufacturers in the region, since they are the ones that make the laptops and screens that are enabling so many of us to work from home at the moment.
Brian, let's talk about another of our big stories today. This is the launch of SpaceX's Crew Dragon capsule to the International Space Station. We talked about it in the news, of course. It's not just rocket science, this, though, is it, Brian? It's also big business. What are the financial incentives?
Well, Stuart, as we've talked about, Sunday's launch is the latest step in the privatization of U.S. space travel. Now, up until 2011, NASA owned and operated pretty much the entire U.S. space program. And that situation ended with the closure of the Space Shuttle program in 2011. Since then, the industry has been increasingly turning to private industry. NASA has so far committed around $8 billion to what's called the Commercial Crew Program. The idea there is to let competition among private firms make smaller missions, like going to the International Space Station, as efficient and as cheap as possible so that NASA itself can focus on first going back to the moon and then going on to Mars. The two main companies vying for bids in this sphere are SpaceX and Boeing. Now, Boeing's contracts with NASA are worth $4.8 billion, while SpaceX's are worth around $3.1 billion. Hasn't been working out so well for Boeing so far. The firm's about a year behind SpaceX after a test flight of its Starliner capsule failed to reach the ISS last December. NASA, though, estimates that using these private firms has saved it over $20 billion in development costs. For instance, the agency gave SpaceX around $1.75 billion to develop this Crew Dragon capsule. Development costs for the space shuttle before that, though, ran around $27.5 billion in today's dollars. Operational costs also now much lower. Space shuttle launches cost around $1.7 billion each. This Crew Dragon launch cost only around $400 million. And since the end of the shuttle program, NASA has been paying, in fact, Russia to take astronauts to the ISS. That has not been cheap either. The cost per seat there went from around $40 million in 2011 to over $90 million for the most recent missions. It's been a critical revenue stream for the Russian Space Agency. That could be about to dry up, though, as the price per seat aboard Crew Dragon is just around $55 million, so some big savings there, too. What we've seen and we're starting to see now is essentially a price war between SpaceX and the Russians. The Russians say the low price floated by Elon Musk here is only possible due to U.S. government funding, but they are now dropping their seat price by 30% to try to compete. NASA, for its part, says it's not a competition. Astronauts from the U.S. will still fly on Russian Soyuz rockets. cosmonauts from Russia are still welcome on these U.S. commercial flights. The reality, though, is that like many areas of U.S.-Russian relations, space travel has been a bit of a source of tension lately, and it's not likely to get any easier in the near future with these developments.
Brian, thank you very much. Brian Quinn from our business desk joining us there from home. There you go. Now you know how much it costs to get to the moon. You might need a little bit of training first before, though.